I wrote a book called Going the Wrong Way, obviously because going to ending up in Argentina rather than Australia. But I sort of realized I've gone the wrong way quite a few times in my life. I've taken the not the easy route, taken the harder route, and enjoyed the journey rather than the destination. But I think very often as we get older, we reflect and see that a lot of times you strive so hard to get somewhere, whether it's an exam or a job or a career path, that you're too busy trying to get to the destination that you forget about the journey along the way, you know?
Welcome to the Boomer Woman's Podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. Boomer women. Are we wise women? Are we mavens? Are we crones? Hell yeah. And we're also still curious, fun-loving, interesting, the list goes on. This podcast is for you. My guests are folk who have a message for our demographic. And if you want to hear a specific message, let me know and I'll find the guests. This podcast is also a conversation. We women know its value, we know how to do it, and we must perpetuate the art form. I try and let my guests have the greater say, and usually we fit in a good laugh or two. Listen in now to today's guest. I always have a specific reason for chatting with guests on this podcast. Most often, I'm hoping, the subject will be of interest to someone in the audience. Well, hopefully more than someone. Every once in a while, the guest is of specific interest to me. Today's guest is one of those. Northern Ireland in the 1970s. I was never there, but my cousin's husband was shot because of his political leanings. Hopping on a motorcycle, to feel the freedom of the wind and the road that rarely ends, I began that adventure at age 48. In the early 2000s, I followed the adventures of two movie stars as they rode their bikes around the world, down one set of continents and up another. It brought tears as I watched because as much as I would have loved the experience, I knew I didn't have it in me, physically or mentally. Today's guest spent a chunk of his adult life doing all of the above, except no sponsors, no state-of-the-art motorcycle, no press, no support team, no fixers, no situation training, no social media. He left Belfast in 1979 on a cafe racer, Moto Guzzi. And I can't wait to hear more. Chris Donaldson, welcome to the Boomer Woman's Podcast.
Hi, Agnes. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Okay, what I know of your story is both mind-blowing and blood-chilling. Can we start at the beginning? What was life like in Belfast through the 70s?
Well, looking back, it was pretty crap. It was when you're growing up as a kid, you don't know anything else, so it's what you have is what you get, sort of thing. But there was bombs going off and bullets flying around the town. We just got used to it. Went on going to school and went to school in the center of town. And we used to be sort of look out, see the blast going off around the smoke going up around the city center on the odd afternoon. My father's shop, there was a furniture shop just down the road from the school. It got blown up several times, but you just got on with it. When you're younger, I guess when we got to older teens, we realized there must be more to the world somewhere else. So it ignited a spark, I think, to get me out of town. And for some reason, I decided to go to Australia on a motorbike. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me why. I was into motorbikes at the time.
But let's talk about Belfast to Australia, motorcycle. We're not talking a touring bike. We're talking a cafe racer. Tell us about the bike.
Well, I had this Moto Guzzi cafe racer, which I had when I was about 20, when I was 19. And it was the best bike in town. I thought it was the coolest dude around. So, you know what you like, you get so passionate when you're that age. And I thought this bike could go anywhere. And to be fair, I was right, it did. But it's not the bike you would choose. You would choose a BMW or a touring bike, which I thought was very boring. I wanted to do with a bit more style and panache than that. But I hadn't quite realized that the main problem with that was I didn't actually go to Australia at all. I ended up going everywhere else bar Australia and ended up in Argentina of all places.
Okay.
So everything went wrong. everything went wrong. We got to 1979. I got to London in November, and just after I got there, the Ayatollah Khomeini took over the American embassy in Tehran. If you remember that far back,
Yeah. Oh,
it's
yeah.
basically after 3 years of my planning to go to drive to Australia, ride to Australia, I couldn't go. I had already left home, so I couldn't go home again after being away for 2 weeks. So I decided, well, I'll go south. I'll go to South Africa. So basically, after careful planning, years of careful planning to do this once in a lifetime journey, I ended up without a notion where I was going, no planning, no idea where what was ahead of me. And it's hard to imagine these days with the internet that if you want any information, you just Google it. But I remember back those days, you had a guidebook, and the guidebook was out of date by the time you read it anyway, probably. But I had no idea where I was going.
If it's okay, can I just throw some place names at you? And if there, something comes to mind, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, could you tell us a little bit about the trip?
Yep.
Okay. So you mentioned Iran, and then I take it the next was the Sahara Desert. Now, was the Dakar even a thing at that point in time?
No, they had the first Paris Dakar that year, I think in '79. It was a novelty. The whole idea of riding a motorbike across the desert was pretty much unheard of. Adventure bikes and off-road bikes were pretty much unheard of as well. So Moto Guzzi Le Mans certainly was everything you don't want to have in a desert. It had it, you know. But I managed to get across the Sahara. I think it took a week to cross about 400 miles. The worst day, I think we're riding all day in a convoy. We covered about 10 miles, so you can imagine
Yeah,
it was
no, I
hard to ride.
can't, as a matter of fact, which is why I'm talking to you. So you had a convoy at least. You weren't out there in the middle of the heat and the sand all by yourself.
No, that would have been sheer lunacy. It was bad enough. What a Guzzi Le
Come on.
Mans.
As if Belfast to Australia isn't a bit of lunacy. Ah, dear. Okay, so you made it through in a week, 400 miles in a week. Wow, that's crazy. You kept on going to South Africa.
Kept on
Anything?
going. Went through Sudan, through Uganda just after Idi Amin had just left, so it was a bit chaotic there. There was a civil war going on there. I was quite lucky in a way. I just seemed to keep missing civil wars. I got through Rhodesia just after the war there, just before it turned into Zimbabwe, and ended up in South Africa in the middle of apartheid, which was a bit of a dead end because nobody was going there or coming back from there at that stage with the sanctions. But I managed to get a job in a sailing yacht coming back to Europe, which was pretty unique. I don't know if you're into sailing, but there was the Volvo Ocean Round the World race, which was a sort of predecessor of that. The guys would train for years to get on a boat on that sort of race, whereas I'd done a bit of dinghy sailing, so it's sort of out of my depth to say the least.
Oh, dear. I want to go back to your trip through Africa. You know, you're talking about either just missing or, preceding a war zone. Did you have the same fear that most of us would have had coming from Belfast, where, as you said, bullets and bombs were part of life? Did you recognize at the time that it could be dangerous?
Yeah, I knew it could be dangerous. I suppose I was probably a bit more aware, a bit more used to guns, people with guns walking around the place than other people would on reflection. Some of the situations I got myself into, such as the likes of Uganda and Tanzania, I mean, even Africa was pretty wild in those days, quite a few countries. So I wouldn't do it again. I wouldn't do it I wouldn't do it now in my old age, put it that way. The impetuousness of youth, you think you're indestructible.
Yeah, yeah. And perhaps, perhaps that's what it takes. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. As you say, you get older and wiser. Now you entered a yacht race, or you crewed on a yacht back to Europe. What happened to the bike?
Well, the race was fell on my feet there. The race was being sponsored by a shipping agent, a shipping company. So they said, "Where do you want me to send the bike?" And I said, "Well, what about America?" They didn't go to Australia, so I got it sent to Los Angeles and picked it up there 3 months later. So it was at this stage in the game, I realized I was traveling for the sake of traveling rather than traveling to go somewhere. It was really good. It's what the beauty of the trip was at that stage. It was a journey. 99% of the time when you go on a journey, there's a destination in mind. You're going to get somewhere, pretty obviously. But I was just traveling for the sake of traveling, just to enjoy the days as each day unfolded. I had a destination in mind, but it didn't really matter whether it was America or South Africa or wherever it was going. So that was part of the beauty of it, as a real sort of nomad, as I feel like.
Yeah, it's interesting. I interviewed a woman a few weeks ago who did a similar trip, and she's my age, and she just had a friend camperize a car, so not even a van, but a car. And she did the same thing, no real destination. And it was really soul finding, shall we say, um,
Yeah,
just because of the people she met and the things she saw and the places she went.
yeah. No, and whenever, and the reason we're talking is I wrote a book called Going the Wrong Way, obviously because going to ending up in Argentina rather than Australia. But I sort of realized I've gone the wrong way quite a few times in my life. I've taken the not the easy route, taken the harder route, and enjoyed the journey rather than the destination. But I think very often as we get older, we reflect and see that a lot of times you strive so hard to get somewhere, whether it's an exam or a job or a career path, that you're too busy trying to get to the destination that you forget about the journey along the way.
Yeah, yeah, no, I hear that. But you left South Africa on a yacht. Where did that yacht end up?
Well, the yacht ended up in Rotterdam about five
Okay.
weeks later after the rudder falling off in the middle of the Atlantic, with a few adventures there too.
Yeah.
So we managed to get through that. We got back to Rotterdam by hook or by crook, and then I flew over to the States to Los
Okay.
Angeles to pick up the bike. The trouble was I hadn't had time to prepare the bike. It was just driven down Africa, so it's pretty wrecked, and the clutch didn't work. So I couldn't to change gear. I just had to jump on the bike, push it, and kick it into gear. So I had to drive the whole way from Los Angeles up to Seattle to where a friend lived with no clutch. So every time the child stopped at the traffic lights, I had to put the bike into neutrals and then get off and push it to start it, and then jump on and drive off on it again. So it was a bit hairy going up the West Coast.
But how did you
So
change gears? Like, I mean,
we just crunched it into gear.
oh, so so does it sound like a car when you grind the gears?
No, a bike actually, you can kick into gear much easier than a car. It would be
Okay.
harder in a car. This is the way the gearbox works. The hardest thing was actually just getting moving, go from 0 to 5 miles an hour, so you kick her into first. So that was a bit hectic. So I was a bit annoyed because I missed the whole west coast of America. Really, I just had to keep going as much as I could. I got up to Vancouver, spent a few days there with a friend, and then I think the problem was I lost my passport and my wallet, so I had to cross Canada as quickly with about $50 in my pocket. So I had to go to Ottawa to get my new passport. I think I made it across in 6 days, which was pretty.
God.
I hadn't quite realized how big Canada was. And it was
Yeah.
about 3,000 miles.
Yeah, yeah. I remember driving in a car from the West Coast here through to Toronto in about 5 days.
Yeah.
And my wake up call was when my oil light came on. And I went, wait a minute, I just had an oil change a few days ago. And then you realize, yeah, that you've just driven all this way. So, yeah. So in Seattle with your friend, did you
Yeah.
get the clutch fixed?
Got the clutch fixed, yeah,
Oh, serious.
and got the bike done up a wee bit, so I was ready to rock and roll again. And then I decided, I've never heard of South America at school and so on, but it was one of those distant places that really didn't have much in common with. Spoke a different language, spoke a different culture. So I thought I'd head down that direction after that, after working in the States for a few months to try and replenish my funds. Which was funny enough. The bike, with traveling, whatever. The main problem was it set off on a 4 month journey to Australia with about 1,000 quid, £1,000, which is probably about $5,000 now. So after a year, it started. The lack of funds was the main problem.
Yeah, yeah. So South America, what was your route through that?
So yeah, I went down to Texas and then across the border, terrified of Mexico after hearing all the stories that everybody hears. But like as always, you get to these places that you hear so many bad stories about, and people are as friendly as you like. You build up this picture in your mind. It's going to be horrible, and it turns out they're the nicest people you can meet. Obviously there's bad guys there too, but it was a great experience traveling through Central America down to Panama. Now hitched a ride on the old DC-6 cargo plane going to Medellin, right in the middle of Pablo Escobar's reign. So sort of blindly landed in the Medellin. Again, more guns and more machine guns, everybody walking around. So at this stage, I was getting very used to being followed around by people with machine guns.
Good Lord. My thought was, because I have another monitor over here with the cover of your book on it, is it probably did help that you were just some young guy on a bike. I mean, you didn't look wealthy. You weren't driving a fancy car. You don't look like you have a lot of money in your back pocket in that picture.
No. But motorcycles they're quite an emotive sort of form of transport. You either love them or you hate them. Most people are sort of fond of them to some extent. So they're a great way of breaking down the barrier, whether they're a policeman or a soldier or just somebody at the side of the road. You can talk about bikes, talk about where you've come from. It's clear, it's obvious that you're not a local, so people take an interest. So it's a great way of getting talking to the local people. Whereas if you imagine if you're in a car, the chances are you may be with somebody else as well. So the windows are up and you're an immediate barrier between you and the outside world, if you like. And traveling on your own as well, it's much easier to get to talking to people because you have to. You're
Yeah.
not going to a restaurant or bar or wherever you are. You can sit on your own if you like, but you got to start sort of pick up a conversation with somebody at some stage. So it's a great way of traveling on a motorbike on your own, although it sounds a bit scary because you don't have the security of that pane of glass in front between you and the outside world as well. You're there, you stop and you're in the middle of that situation where you are.
Yeah, we called it the cage. You're on the bike
Yeah,
or without the cage.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah, and I remember stopping, even just for a meal or coffee or something. And yeah, you do get talking. And I found too, because in those days there weren't a lot of women on bikes.
Yeah.
People would talk to me just because of that. You take the helmet off and you see a woman of 50 years or whatever riding a bike, and especially a big one. It was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So it's basically it's a breakdown. It's a break, something to talk about and something to
Yeah,
get the conversation going.
yeah, yeah. And I'm sure yours looked like it had a lot of miles on it. Like, I mean, did it have some dents
Well,
and
at that
scrapes?
stage, I've been trying to look after it because that was my ticket home was to sell the bike, and that was how to get my funds to get home again. So I was trying to keep it as good as it could. But obviously, by the time I got to South America, it was hanging together with bits of rope and so on. The suspension was collapsing, and everything was wearing out. And then I got hepatitis myself when I was in Ecuador. So that sort of killed the trip a wee bit because I had to stay in a hotel for a couple of weeks and started to run out of money, and the bike was dying off. And eventually got some money sent over from home, and tried to take the train down to Buenos Aires because I probably couldn't ride anymore. Of course, I got a few miles in the train, and there's a storm had washed the track away, so I had to back in the bike.
Perhaps it's a good thing you were traveling all over the world. Otherwise, what people would have said, "Oh, here comes that Chris Donaldson."
Well, it seemed to be every time I decided to go somewhere, there was something that would stop me going there. I'd end up having to go somewhere else.
And,
But
and yet you didn't have the common sense to say, maybe I should listen to the
no,
universe.
no, never happened.
Oh, dear.
So yeah, so I got back. It's 1981, and I started writing a book at that stage, and I guess life got in the way. I think 9 out of 10 people who start writing books never finish them. And somebody else was another journalist, middle-aged journalist, had done something similar and wrote a book about it. So I thought, well, nobody's going to be interested in my story anymore. But I hadn't realized, I suppose, at that stage, it's only looking back on it, I realized that the whole journey was very much a coming of age journey for me. I was 21 years old, sort of boy to man, if you like. It was a lot of experiences that sort of changed me along the way. So I was able to look back and whenever I did write the book in the 60s to use my sort of view of experience to see what effect the challenges and so on it had on me and how that changed me as I went along. So I think the book I wrote when I was 60, even though it was 40 years later, this was a much better story than it would have done if it had been 20, 23 or 24, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Did your friends and family, when you got back to Ireland, sort of say, you're a far better man than you were when you left?
Not at all, no. I mean, I got back, it was probably quite the opposite because it's after an experience like that, it's quite hard to fit back into normal life again. So you have to sort of readjust yourself again. It probably took 6 months to even just to fit in again. And people aren't really that interested in it's you're telling a story which is about having a game of golf that afternoon, they can relate to that. But if you're telling a story about driving across the Sahara Desert on a motorbike, it's so unrelatable to people. It's not really a conversation. It's like a conversation stopper rather than something of interest. So people say, "Oh, that's very interesting," and then go back to the rugby or something like that. You know, so stories if the story is too far away from somebody's viewpoint, it's very hard for them to contribute to it, I guess.
Well, the reason you're on this podcast is because I would far rather read your book. I have a saying that watching golf is like watching paint dry. So,
Yeah.
well, and I probably shouldn't have said that on podcast. I'm going to have a whole bunch of people writing me nasty notes. Oh, dear. Okay, so you found time to get married, have a family. That was in Ireland, was it?
Yes, mainly in Ireland. Got married, had a family, got divorced, got married again, had another family. Had a couple of businesses. I was in property, got hammered in the crash 10, 15 years ago. Ended up living in Dubai for 8 years. Came back 3 years ago. Lived in Dublin a bit. So I had a various careers in property, furniture, IT, and stuff like that. So I've jumped around a few different things as I've got older, and then I've got to sort of 60 friends who are retiring, and start thinking, well, what's it all about? You know, when you write a book about what you did when you were 21, you start reflecting, well, what's happened in the last 40 years? You know, so I suppose that's where we're coming into the baby boomers. We're all coming to that stage now. So I realized that I never actually got to Australia, and one of my friends said to me, you never got to run, I'll have another go." So I had to still have the same Moto Guzzi. I brought it home with me in the end. Never sold it. So I thought, well, let's take the old bike and my old self and see if we could ride to Australia 2 years ago to set off. So it's very much a sort of, if the older first trip is a coming of age story, this is a coming of old age story because it's sort of reaching retirement. It's really a challenge to see if I could still do what I used to do when I was 21, you know.
But I take it that this traveling companion this time was younger than you
Well,
on a
he's about 15 years younger than me, and
pretty nice bike.
ironically, he had a new bike, and we got to Greece, and then he decided that it wasn't for him, so he decided to come home. So after talking me into riding the motorbike to Australia, he decided not to go. So, being a stubborn old git, I decided, well, I'm going to go on my own. So, I mean, one of the obstacles at this age is having time to stay away from your family and away from work and so on. So what I was able to do is ride for 2 or 3 weeks, park the bike up somewhere, come back home, come back to work for 2 or 3 months, and then go out again later, 2 or 3 months later, and could do another leg. So when I rode to Australia, I actually did it in about six different legs. First to Greece, then Israel, then Dubai, then Pakistan, then India, and Nepal, and then to Brisbane. So it took about a year and a half, and probably rode for about 12 weeks over that period of a year and a half. So this is a different set of problems you have when you're older. You have more money than I had when I was 21, but less time. When you're 21, you got time and all the time in the world, but no money. So,
Now, on your second, I just need to ask, on your second trip, were there any wars, any earthquakes, any
No,
catastrophes?
no, I was a bit more organized this time. I've got a bit more sensible in my old age, obviously. Did manage to get through Iran. I nearly got stuck there because there was a few problems with getting visas and getting visas to get in and visas to get out again. The nice thing about coming from Belfast is you can have an Irish passport as well as a British passport.
Okay.
American, Canadian, and British passports aren't terribly popular in Iran. But again, as I was saying about Mexico, Iran is the country we hear all the time as the bogeyman. It's a terrible place to be. But actually, of all the places I've ever been, probably the Iranians are the most friendly, hospitable people to travelers that I've met anywhere. They're really pleased to see Westerners and want to take you to their home and feed you and put you up, and very accommodating, very friendly people, which is accentuated because it's the place you're more nervous about going to in the first place, and it turns out it's completely the other side of the scale. So it's quite fascinating country.
Now, this is going to be a question coming from a woman, but were there ever any concerns about being invited into somebody's home for like to sleep over or whatever, a bed? Or is that just the nervous woman in me talking?
No, well, I did have a a bit of an occasion in Syria that I had to fight off uh, a rather amorous customs guard, but you'll have to read the book to find out that story.
Oh, no.
So I know where you're coming from in that one.
Okay, well now I've got it open. I'm going to have to click buy when I'm done here. I've
Yeah,
resisted buying it just because I want you to tell the stories. I don't want to do too many lead-ins.
yeah. No, you have to buy the book for that one.
Yeah, okay.
No, you do put yourself on a limb when you're traveling on your own. Obviously, you've no backup. You're on your own. You're sort of trusting people. You're going to somebody's house. And very often, although you don't have a lot of money, you've got a motorbike, you've got an awful lot more than they would have, in places Africa and India. But generally, I find people are much better than you expect them to be. They're hospitable, they're friendly, they look after travelers. And I really haven't had very few bad experiences along the way. As I say, in Iran, there was some of the petrol stations you could only use a credit card, but you couldn't use a Visa card or MasterCard because of the sanctions. So you'd ask somebody could you put petrol in my tank and I'll give you the cash. And very often they would just say, fill up your tank and tell you to go without without taking the money. Just go and enjoy our country. So it's quite the opposite, really, of being in fear. But there's a couple of occasions I do remember, funny enough, in Iran as well, trying to find a hotel, and the guy said, "Follow me," in his car. So I drove through these back streets, and eventually, after 5 minutes, he stopped in this back street, and then another car pulled up beside him. I thought, "Oh God, what have I got myself into here?" And it turned out it was this brother who could speak perfect English. He'd rang him up and brought him over to take me to the hotel that I wanted to go to. So, but yeah, you do put yourself out in a limb a wee bit. I've just probably been lucky, or maybe have a bit of a sixth sense to get myself out of situations that I should before they've evolved into something terribly bad.
Yeah, yeah. My daughter actually told the same story about being in Morocco, and she would have been in her early 20s. Fortunately, she was traveling with a girlfriend and got in a cab to go to some hotel that this fellow, this broken English, ended up in this back alley. And I guess they're just holding hands, frightened to death. And it
Yeah.
turned out he just took them into this back door of the hotel, and it was a beautiful hotel. So it was like, oh, but yeah, I guess that's what adrenaline is for.
Yes.
Um, okay, so you did make it. Okay, the last I read, and I've looked at so many different places that I can find you on the internet, is that you were awaiting the Moto Guzzi festival outside Melbourne.
Yes.
Did that happen?
It did happen. There's a guy has what he calls a Moto Guzzi cathedral. Moto Guzzi's like it's an Italian brand, and like all Italian brands, are very passionate about their product, and their customers are very passionate about their bikes as well. So this guy's built what he calls the cathedral of Moto Guzzi. There's 100 years, been in business for 100 years, and he's got about 100 models of each, more or less, of each year on show in his museum. So my bike is now part of his display at the minute
Oh,
until I
that's great.
decide what to do with it.
But at least it's getting the respect it deserves. My goodness,
Exactly, it's kind
the
of being
story
lauded.
it tells.
It
Gee.
is, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it did very well. It's 45-year-old, 43-year-old motorcycle driving it across India and Pakistan and Nepal, places like that. Doing things to it I shouldn't do to. I should have been treating it with more respect, but it's done the job very very well. I just have to work out how to get it home now.
Details. Is he interested in keeping it for as long as you'll let him?
Yes, I mean, I've been in touch. As I say, bikes have there's a certain camaraderie and a connection with people with the same type of bike as if you like. So there's a whole Guzzi club. I've met people along the way, and the guys in Australia have been very hospitable. Put the bike up and have said they'll keep it as long as they want. So it's been a great. It took me 43 years to get there, but I got a great welcome when I actually made it.
Okay, I have two questions. The first one is, beside your bike in the cathedral, is there a bookshelf with like 100 of your books that can be sold?
He has a few books there as well. Yeah,
Oh, good. Okay, just
that's
putting
just
my
a bit.
marketing hat on.
Uh,
Okay, I guess this question I should have asked at the very beginning. Why Australia? Just out of curiosity.
um, Probably I had a few relations there. Probably an Australian and Irish have probably got a bit of a connection. Just they've always taken our sheep stealers and vagabonds have always ended up in this. Irish people have always ended up in Australia or in the past. I would have been able to get a job there and stay for a while. And it is one of those things that I reflect back on now and say, I think, well, if I'd left Belfast 2 or 3 weeks earlier, I would have got through Iran before the revolution. I would have made it to Australia when I was 21. I sort of think, well, if I'd made it there when I was 21, would have stayed, would have met somebody there, got a job, and my life could have been completely different. Just for the sake of leaving 2 weeks later than I intended to leave, it's sort of you think back on the changes that happen in your life and how much you try and plan things and decide what you're going to do, but other things just happen just by sheer luck or bad luck, whatever way you want to put it. Directions you take.
Yeah, I had an elderly friend at one point in time, and he used to say, if you come to a fork in the road, take it. And
So I did.
yeah, exactly. And life's, yeah, and here you are now, all these years later. That's great. Okay, going to get a little personal here. Life goes on. We don't get any younger. You have Parkinson's?
Yeah, so when I was diagnosed about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's a very mild form of Parkinson's. Very lucky that that hasn't had a terribly strong effect on me. Still able to function pretty well, and it seems to be fairly slow moving. But it was a bit of a challenge. It was one of the reasons I think I wanted to do the trip was just to prove that I could still control my body, my functions, my brain, and do what I could do when I was 21. I have seen a lot of friends my age retiring and going from sort of responsible jobs, running a company, running a business, telling people you're managing large numbers of people, and the next day they're golfing and twice a week and working in the garden. And I think I wanted to sort of show people that there's more to life than that. You don't just because you're retired doesn't mean it's not the end of everything. It's in a way it's the beginning of a new chapter in your life that should be able to do more than you could do before. As I say, when you're in your 20s, you've got time, but you've got the energy, but you've no money. Between 20 and 60, you're too busy running a family, buying a house, paying for things, and bringing up kids. By the time you get 60, you like to think you've got a bit of money and a bit of time, and you should be able to go out and enjoy yourself. That's the theory, anyway.
You'll appreciate the analogy that a friend of mine uses who's still riding, loves to ride. And he talks about retirement as in changing the tires. Like if you're going to go
Yeah,
and do the Dakar, you've got to have a certain type of tire. If you're going to just do highways, you need a certain type of tire, that sort of thing. So that's what retirement is. You're
Yeah,
retiring
that's a
yourself.
good way to look at it. Yeah, because as you say, the word retirement is sort of indicates the end of something, whereas it really should be the beginning of something,
Yeah.
beginning of the rest of your life.
Yeah, I try to
But
use the phrase instead of I'm retiring from something, I'm retiring to something.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Uh, and more and more, I've been hearing that people with Parkinson's too, as soon as they're doing something that they just love, it's part of his or her soul, it's like the Parkinson's just goes away. So that's kind of a nice thing.
Yeah, no, I think concentrate if you're on a motorbike, you're driving, you're riding, you're concentrating all the time. You're focusing on one thing. So the rest of the world doesn't really matter anymore because you have to stay alive, and the only way you can do that is by concentrating 100% of the time, especially in places like India where everybody's out to get you. It seems like that way. So I think it probably does need to ask a doctor, but I think being able to focusing your brain like that does have a beneficial effect on you.
Okay. So, is there anything that you haven't done that you want to get done?
Well, there's lots of things I want to do, and I mean, writing a book was never a really strong on my agenda in life. I was pretty much flunked out of school and most of the things I did, English especially. So it was a great challenge for me to be able to write a book and get it published and self-publish it and promote it and get it out there. It's now got 1,200 5-star reviews. It's doing very well, and I think certainly if I can write a book, anybody can write a book, and everybody has their own unique story to tell. I think what I enjoy as a challenge is doing something that's outside my comfort zone, to learn a new trade, to learn a new skill or whatever, rather than just going along the same old golf or cricket or whatever it is. I like to do different things. I never get very good at them, but I do like the variety of being able to jump and change into different sports and different things.
Well, I think it's like, having those really bad jobs when you're a young person. If you just learn no more than you don't want to do that again, then mission
Yeah,
accomplished. That's okay.
it's true.
So what's next for Chris Donaldson?
Well, as I say, I've still got a daughter still at school, so another couple of years to get that finalized on sort of chapter, I feel like. But I still have a motorbike and sitting in Australia. I'll have to get it back somehow. So we're looking to maybe ship her over the west coast of the States or Vancouver maybe, and ride across the States and actually finally take it around the world for its 50th birthday maybe. My, on my 67th probably that'll be.
Oh dear. Any hard-won wisdoms?
Hard on wisdom, so God. I suppose the main thing is never give up. If you're on your own traveling somewhere, especially in the third world, and you get a problem or a stoppage, a blockage, or something in your way, you nobody else to get you out of that situation. You've got to do it yourself. And one thing it's taught my journeys have taught me is if whatever the situation is, you've got to be able to be responsible for yourself and get yourself out of it again. I think very often these days we're so prone to expect somebody else to, to pick up a phone and call somebody to get me out of the situation, or go backwards. I think traveling has taught me a bit of determination and motivation to get somewhere. If you want to get somewhere, put your head down and try again.
Yeah, I like that. And try again, because sometimes it takes, I'm sure, okay, that didn't work. What do I do now? What do I do the next time? Okay, other than the one chapter that we have to buy the book to read, tell us about your book.
Well, as I said, it's not just about it's called going the wrong way because it's ended up in a completely different direction in the world. But it is about different challenges. And I like to think it's a story about how to, we tend to brought up sort of health and safety. Everybody has to go do the same thing, do the right thing in the right time, the right way, and follow the rules. Sometimes it's a bit more fun to take the wrong direction and see what happens rather than knowing what's going to happen. As I say, one of the problems I think with the modern world is everything's so organized with the internet age. We know everything was is ahead of us. Very easy just to follow a path which is predetermined. Through our careers and everything. I think it's loses a bit of the challenge of going the wrong direction to see what surprises are in store for us,
We're recording only the audio here, but I can see your face, and there's this little grin playing as you're talking about the challenges, That's great. The book's on Amazon, is that correct?
It's on Amazon, yeah. Audiobook, ebook, and paperback.
Okay, good.
So yeah, it's got a great reaction. I've just published the Italian version of it. I got it translated into Italian a couple of weeks ago. Because Italians are obviously big Moto Guzzi fans, so hopefully that will take off as well.
Okay, I did see that, and I'm thinking, that's interesting. It didn't, obviously didn't put two and two together. And I just thought, oh, well, I guess he's going to translate it into like 300 different languages, and this is just the first one. But it obviously makes sense. Yeah, Italian. Okay, before we close, can I ask you a personal question?
Sure, just between you and me.
And the whole wide world. What was it like living on a yacht with your whole family for 8 years? I mean, it was a big yacht by the sounds of it, but still.
Well, I guess sort of going back to 1980, whenever I managed to get that place in the yacht race, coming back through South and the North Atlantic, I sort of forgot about that side of my life until I got to Dubai, and I couldn't afford to pay the accommodation costs out there are horrendous.
Oh,
So it was actually cheaper to buy a boat and live in a boat for the price of 2 years rent. We bought the whole boat.
Wow.
But it's like a lot of things. Everything's comparative. Once you get used to having a smaller space, you don't need a big space. You don't need a big house. You've got everything you need in a smaller space. Once you get used to not having space to leave all your rubbish lying around, so it's just a matter of focusing the mind. But it was great fun.
I guess there's not really a lot of room to even have rubbish, so that works.
No,
How tall are you?
about 5'10".
Did you have clearance?
Oh yeah, it was 47-foot yacht.
Yeah, but
So
I don't. You can tell I don't know anything about yachts. So.
Well, you could bang your head. There's always lots of things to bang into in a boat. You gotta bang your head, your toes. Usually your toes are the main problem because you'd be barefoot in Dubai. It was quite hot, so you'd be knocking you into something or other. But it was a great experience. My daughter was from 5 to about 11 or 12, so she was brought up quite a few of her formative years on living on a boat. So whether that will come back to haunt her or whether she'll appreciate it in these years years go forward, we'll find out.
Living in a house even a small house must have felt like a mansion at the time she done that. Wow. Okay. Anything I haven't asked you? Anything you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we've covered my whole life story in half an hour, have we?
40 minutes.
40 minutes.
Okay.
There too.
Oh dear. Well, you've impressed the hell out of me. I mean, I had to sell my bike a few years ago just because my knees are so bad, and I was if I stopped, I would fall over. So that wasn't very safe. But anyways, you've inspired me to read the book and maybe do it with a nap beside me.
I met a guy in Australia who was 92 and he had a similar problem. So he bought a sidecar. He had an old vintage sidecar, which he'd got an angle grinder to and put a starter motor on it. So he could start it and ride. He's 92 years old. Incredible guy.
I will admit,
There's always a solution to these things. You just need to
Yeah, I was going to say, I look at
Go a different
trikes now
direction.
with a little bit of, that might
Maybe.
solve my problem. Not going to fall over when I stop. Ah, dear. Okay. Chris, thank you. Your website link, or do you have that website still, or is that?
Yes, it's chrisdonaldson.world. You can order a book direct there, or it's on Amazon or eBay in UK. But Amazon is a company we love to hate, but they do everything. They
Yeah,
cover the whole world. I can sell a book from Belfast all over the world. It's quite amazing.
yeah, it is pretty amazing. Yeah, yeah. Okay, website link is in the show notes. Link to the book will be on your page at boomwithbang.com. That's my website. Listeners, if you have thoughts on today's show, please talk to us. More importantly, though, just go and buy Chris's book. Share this episode, whether you love pushing one's limits stories or whether you push your limits vicariously like me. I can't wait to read it. Chris Donaldson, thank you so much for being my guest today, for sharing just a few of the adventures with us and giving me more vicarious thoughts.
It's been a pleasure.
Have a great rest of the week.
You too.
I very rarely put an addenda onto podcast episodes, but this time I wanted to tell you I followed up on my promise to buy Chris's book. Oh my goodness. Whether you're a writer like me who is happier with no surprises, if you, like me, enjoy living your biggest adventures vicariously, or if you're a fan of adventure stories, Chris's book will not disappoint. I seriously could not put it down. The link to buy the book is in the show notes and on Chris's page at the podcast website. And that link is also in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in today.